Hello, algebra students, and today we'll be continuing our 7.5 notes on factoring. Today specifically, we're looking at factoring trinomials. We're going to use a method called magic numbers. So we're going to practice just finding magic numbers first. What are magic numbers? Our goal of magic numbers is going to be to fill in this side and this side. So how we do that, we find two numbers whose product is the top and whose sum is the bottom. So we're finding two numbers in example A that multiply to 7 and add to 8. And sometimes I like to add a little multiplication sign here and addition sign here just to remind me they're multiplying to 7 and adding to 8. So first we're going to think, what are some factors of 7? 7 is a prime number, so its only factors are 7 and 1. Which, lucky for us, they add to 8. So our magic numbers, in this case, are 1 and 7. All right, example B, we're finding numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 11. Now let's think of some factors of 30. I have 1 and 30. I have 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. Now I look at the factors and I think, which two add to 11? 1 and 30 do not. 2 and 17 do not. 3 and 10 do not. So it would be 5 and 6. In this case, 5 and 6 are my magic numbers. They multiply to 30 and add to 11. All right, so what happens when I throw a negative in? In this case, they're going to multiply to positive 6, and they're going to add to negative 5. So let's think, what kind of numbers can multiply to a positive and add to a negative? Well, I know either a positive and a positive multiply to a positive, or a negative and a negative. Now, a positive and a positive number are not going to multiply to a negative number. So I'm looking for magic numbers that are both negative, because a negative and a negative will multiply to a positive and add to another negative. All right, so now we think of factors of 6. We could have negative 1 and negative 6. We could have negative 3 and negative 2. Now, if we're looking at which one of these add to negative 5, negative 1 and negative 6 are going to add to negative 7, so it's not those. So it's going to be negative 3 and negative 2. All right, last example, we have numbers that multiply to negative 8 and add to negative 2. What kind of numbers multiply to a negative and add to a negative? Well, I'm going to have one negative and one positive. All right, so now we have to be a little bit more creative. Let's think of factors of 8. We have 1 and 8. We have 2 and 4. Now I'm going to see which ones can add to negative 2 if I make one of them negative. Now, 1 and 8, if I make one of them negative, I could either get 7 or I could get negative 7. So it's not going to be that. But if I have 2 and 4, all right, let's try negative 2 and positive 4. Negative 2 plus positive 4 is going to be positive 2. So now let's try negative 4 and positive 2. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2, and those are my magic numbers. All right, so it's also partly guess and check. You list out the factors, and then you see what add to the bottom number. It's okay to try one and then be like, wait a minute, that doesn't work. Try another. As long as you get to it eventually. All right, so now that we've had some practice finding magic numbers, let's try actually factoring. Okay, so when we factor trinomials, the first step is to determine the magic numbers. Now, in the last example, these were set up for us. Now we just get to set it up ourselves. We want numbers that multiply to the last one and add to the middle one. So the top number is going to be 21 and the bottom number is going to be 10. They multiply to that third term, the constant term, and then they add to our middle term. All right, so let's find the magic numbers of 21 and 10. Why don't you pause the video, see if you can find the magic numbers on your own. Play it back to see if you got it right. All right, factors of 21 are 1 and 21 or 3 and 7. 3 and 7 add to 10. Those are our magic numbers, 3 and 7. All right, step 2 is to divide the magic numbers into two terms and rewrite. What that means is we're going to divide the middle term into two terms using the magic numbers. So I'm going to take this expression, x squared plus 10x plus 21, and I'm going to rewrite it and split the 10x into 3x and 7x. So we're going to say x squared plus 7x plus 3x. It does not matter which order you put them in, plus 21. That's step 2, rewrite with two terms as the middle term. All right, then we factor by grouping. Remember, this was in our pre-7.5 notes. So to factor by grouping, I'm going to split these into two terms. So then x squared and 7x have an x in common. Not two terms, two sets of parentheses. All right, x squared and 7x have an x in common. I'm going to pull that out. I get x plus 7. 3x and 21 have a 3 in common. When I pull that out, I'm left with an x plus 7. All right, so then when I write my final answer, I'm going to have x plus 3 and x plus 7. It does not matter which order these are in. If you had x plus 7 as the first binomial and x plus 3 as the second, that's fine, as long as you have both binomials in your final answer. All right, so hopefully you have those steps written down from the last slide and you can apply them now. Just for quick reference, I'm going to add them to the top so that we can use those while we're solving these examples. All right, so we're going to factor into two binomials. I have x squared plus 10x plus 16. Step 1 is to find the magic numbers. So remember that last term goes on the top. That's what they multiply to. And then that middle term goes on the bottom. That's what they add to. All right, so I'm finding numbers that multiply to 16 and add to 10. My magic numbers are 8 and 2. You could list out factors of 16. So I have 1 and 16, 4 and 4, 8 and 2. The only ones that add to 10 are 8 and 2. So step 1, find the magic numbers, done. Step 2, I split the middle term into two terms using the magic numbers. So I'm going to rewrite this trinomial, but instead of writing 10x, I'm going to write plus 8x plus 2x, and then plus 16. All right, and then step 3, I factor by grouping, so let's group them into our two binomials, and then let's factor out the GCF. X squared and 8x have an x in common. I'm left with x plus 8. And 2x and 16 have a 2 in common. I'm left with x plus 8. All right, so now when I factor out the binomial, my final answer is going to be x plus 8 times x plus 2. Again, totally okay to have these backwards. If you had x plus 2 first and x plus 8 second, that's the same thing. All right, let's see if you can pause the video and do example B by yourself. And then play it back to see if you got it right. I'm going to go through it step by step, so if you get stuck, feel free to play it and then get unstuck and then keep trying to finish it by yourself. Just keep pausing and playing. All right, so step 1, find the magic numbers. They should multiply to 6 and add to 7. My magic numbers are going to be 6 and 1. So then step 2 is to rewrite where the middle term becomes the two magic numbers, so plus 6x plus 1x. And step 3 is to factor by grouping. So x squared and 6x have an x in common. We're left with x plus 6. 1x and 6 only have 1 in common. So I have plus 1 and then left with x plus 6. So when I factor out the binomial, my final answer is x plus 6 times x plus 1. All right, so now we're going to try factoring with some negatives in there. We're going to do the steps the same way. We're going to start by finding our magic numbers. They need to multiply to 12 and add to negative 8. If I think of factors of 12, I have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. The kind of numbers that are going to multiply to a positive and add to a negative are both going to be negative. So just a note to self, if ever there is a positive number up here and a negative number down here, your two magic numbers will be negative. All right, so then I know I have negative 6 and negative 2 because 2 and 6 add to 8. So step 2, I'm going to rewrite that trinomial, and I'm going to split the middle term into the magic numbers. So I have x squared minus 6x minus 2x, it's a minus, plus 12. Does not matter which order you write this in, you will get the same answer regardless. Then we're going to factor by grouping. So we're going to group these into two binomials. X squared and negative 6x have a x in common. I'm left with an x minus 6. And negative 2x plus 12 have a 2 in common. And I'm actually going to factor out a negative 2 because I know that I need this term to be minus 6. So when I divide negative 2x by negative 2, I'm left with positive x. And then positive 12 divided by negative 2 is negative 6. So now I can factor out my matching binomial, x minus 6. I'm left with x minus 2, and that is our final answer. All right, second example, I'm looking for magic numbers that multiply to negative 21 and add to positive 4. Now, if you ever have a negative number up here, no matter whether this bottom is positive or negative, if you ever have a negative number up there, you're going to have a positive and a negative magic number. Now, whether the bottom one is positive or negative decides which term is bigger. So the difference between our two magic numbers is going to be 4. And because 4 is positive, the bigger number will be the positive magic number. So let's think of factors of 21. I have 1 and 21 and 3 and 7. We're going to make 7 positive because it's bigger and 4 is positive. And then the 3 is the negative magic number. So 7 plus negative 3 is positive 4. All right, so step 2, I rewrite the trinomial with the two magic numbers instead of the middle number. So I have x squared instead of 4x. I'm going to write plus 7x minus 3x minus 21. Then we are going to factor by grouping. So x squared and 7x have an x in common. I'm left with an x plus 7. And negative 3x and negative 21 have a negative 3 in common. I'm left with an x plus 7. Factor out our binomial x plus 7, and we're left with an x minus 3. And that is our final answer. All right, I want you to pause the video, try the last one by yourself, and then play it back to see if you got it right. I'm going to go through the whole thing step by step, so if you get stuck, feel free to play it, see where you got stuck, try it again, and then check your final answer. All right, so v squared minus v minus 42. I'm going to set up my magic numbers. I'm looking for numbers that multiply to negative 42 and add to negative 1. Remember, if there's no number there, you can assume there's a 1 there. All right, and then also remember, if it's a negative up top, that means I'm looking for both a positive and a negative magic number. So let's think of our factors of 42. I have 1 and 42. I have 2 and 21. 3 and 14, and 6 and 7. Now the only factors that are one way are 6 and 7. We're going to make the 7 negative because it's a negative 1, and the 6 positive. So positive 6 and negative 7 multiply to negative 42 and add to negative 1. Next step, we're going to rewrite trinomial with our magic numbers instead. So plus 6v minus 7v minus 42. Then we're going to factor by grouping. V squared and 6v have a v in common. I'm left with v plus 6. And negative 7v and negative 42 have a negative 7 in common. I'm left with v plus 6. Factor out our binomial, v plus 6. We're left with v minus 7. And that's our final answer. All right, so we're going to take this one step further now. We're actually going to be using this a lot in Chapter 8. We're going to factor, and then it's called finding the zeros when we learn it in Chapter 8. Right now, we're just going to think of it as solving an equation. So before I even acknowledge that there's an equal 0 over here, I'm going to start by factoring the left side. So we're going to factor the same way we have been. Set up our magic numbers. I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 2, add to 3. Well, that's going to be 2 and 1. We rewrite it, x squared plus 2x plus 1x plus 2. We factor by grouping. Take out the x, we have an x plus 2 left. 1x and 2 have nothing in common, so that's a plus 1. And then there's an x plus 2. Factor out the x plus 2. And we're left with x plus 1. Now this was bad math etiquette because each time I should have had an equals 0 here. All right, so now we'll acknowledge that there's an equals 0. Notice that this is technically two binomials multiplying to get 0. Now I know whenever I multiply to get 0, one of the things I'm multiplying by, one of the factors, needs to be 0. So there are two possibilities here. Either x plus 2 equals 0 or x plus 1 equals 0. So if I'm solving the equation, either x equals negative 2 or x equals negative 1. Could be both. Could be 1. There are our two possible solutions. All right, see if you can factor and then solve the second one by yourself. Play it back to see if you got it right. Okay, so we're going to start by factoring, looking for numbers that multiply to negative 26, add to 11. Let's see, that's going to be 13 and negative 2. With a negative on top, I know one is positive and one is negative. Then we're going to rewrite v squared plus 13v minus 2v minus 26. Then we're going to factor. This is v plus 13 minus 2, v plus 13. Take out the v plus 13, left with v minus 2. And each time here I should have had an equals 0, just to be consistent. So now either v plus 13 could equal 0 or v minus 2 could equal 0. So either v is negative 13 or v is positive 2. Those are our two solutions. All right, so let's summarize what we learned today. We looked at how you can use factor by grouping to factor a trinomial into the product of two binomials. We did this with magic numbers, and then splitting the middle term into the magic numbers, and then factoring by grouping. So if you could explain in words how you factor x squared minus 9x plus 20, how would you explain that? Pause the video, think about it for a second. All right, so if we were to factor x squared minus 9x plus 20, we would first find magic numbers for 20 and negative 9. So step 1 is magic numbers. And then step 2 is to split the middle term. And then step 3 is to factor by grouping. So how would you determine which factors you use? Well, you use magic numbers. They need to multiply to the top and add to the bottom. All right, thanks for watching the notes video today. Tune in to the Google Meet to see what your homework is.